Thanks for joining us today, fresh out of the theater, as we review Dune Part 2, otherwise known as...
Did they get it right this time?
We're going to see. First, let's start with a spoiler-free review. Eric, what would you give this in terms of rating from 1 to 10?
6.
6.
A solid 6. It's so-so.
Okay. Any particular reason why that you would
They
do
varied heavily from the book in... Definitely when it comes to the personality of the individuals, the characters. So I do not like that when you're stick close to the first part and then say, I want to do it for my own reasons.
Okay.
For diversity and inclusion.
Well, I don't know if I would totally agree with that, but I would give it a 7. Theatrically, I would give it a 10. But we're going to take a look at a deeper view on this in a little bit. There's going to be a spoiler section. We're doing the spoiler-free section first. Over the past couple of weeks, we looked at Dune, the Dune franchise altogether as a comparison to the 1984 version of Dune, and then compared it to The Lord of the Rings and both Frank Herbert's and J.R.R. Tolkien's philosophies, compared those, and then asked the question, where is God? Now, this got a lot of big controversy. They said, people were saying, well, you wouldn't have Christianity back then, but then when we looked at, where everything was mixed in, and the big question is, where is God in science fiction in general? And then we asked a couple of days ago about Islam and the Fremen religion in Dune. How are those two, is the Fremen religion really based on Buddhism and Islam? And if it's supposed to be based on Islam, how much is it? And we extrapolated from there. Spoiler review. I want to give everybody a heads up. If you have not seen the movie, and if you want to see it without any kind of spoilers, you may want to pause here, go see the movie, and then come back and join us. We would love to have you. We're going to look at the film from 3 different perspectives: a theatrical review, an adaptation review, which is what you already mentioned partially, and then a thematic review, which I think is probably the most important. Theatrical review. How well was the story told? I think, as far as the cinematography and the music was fantastic. This is by Hans Zimmer.
They handled the music well. They used the same sort of strategy as the last movie, the actual Dune in the 80s.
Yeah.
They used music heavily. They also used music heavily to emphasize the points. And
it really did help, I think, bring up the emotions in. It had the feeling of grandeur with this. My only wish that when I'd seen the movie, I'd not seen it in a regular theater, but maybe seen it in an IMAX or a larger format to get the full effect of everything. But they had, in this particular theater that I was in, they had that volume cranked up pretty loud. And you could really feel it. But, and they did good, I think it did good use of the music too, because it wasn't overpowering. I don't think it was distracting. It was more rising up of the occasion during different parts of the movie. There was a combat scene at the end with Paul and Phaedra. Thank you. I was drawing a blank. During that combat, you didn't really hear the music. They toned it down, and it was more the grunting, and that did help. There was it did draw more emotion and focus into the fight itself. How about the CGI or anything like that?
CGI was well handled. It wasn't over. I didn't find it to be overwhelming.
I didn't find distracting at all. Any kind of not just CGI, but special effects in general.
Yeah, it wasn't overwhelming.
Yeah. You did have nothing was distracting. I think one thing that can draw you out of a movie is when you're watching it is that something's all right, that's fake. But I did not pause anytime during the movie to say that. And probably one of the biggest things would be the sandworms, how they're handling that. And there was one point in particular where he is riding, Paul is riding the sandworm. That was pretty cool. So we're going to as we're talking, we're going to bring out some of the trailers here to give you kind of a flavor of what's happening in the story. So I heard some people say it was as good as The Lord of the Rings.
No.
Why would you say no?
No, not nearly that good. Again, the characters were. It would be the characters. that really were driving the story that fell flat in
See,
a lot of
I would
ways.
agree with you. There's not a whole lot that you can really identify in the story as characters. As with the Lord of the Rings, you had a Fellowship. You had all the different characters involved in that you can really root for. Here, it was Paul, of course, maybe some of the Fremen. You really want him to be accepted by the Fremen, especially during this last scene where he's being looked at as possibly being Muad'Dib, the one that they have heard all the prophecies, so-called prophecies about. It's just basically propaganda by the Bene Gesserits. So I would say that it was, in general, one of the better science fiction movies in the last, perhaps, decade. I
don't know if I
would put it.
It would be up there as far as definitely the last few years. I'd say that it's pretty close.
Right.
To top
Now we gave Godzilla -1 last year. We gave.
I still think Godzilla -1 is better.
Yes, and the problem with just doing a basic rating is you don't really get a feel for it. This is in different categories.
Yes.
Godzilla -1. This is supposed to be more of a grand, wider scope. We're talking about multi-planets, multi-generational. There's all these millions of people that are involved, as opposed to Godzilla -1. It focuses on the kamikaze pilot and his sweetheart and what happens with the big monster. So, yeah, but this was a different one. I would not say it ranks that high for that, but for the theatrical aspect, I would say it was a 10. The adaptation review, how closely does this book match
the movie?
How close does a movie match the book?
As far as the overall story goes, from beginning to end, decently. But as far as the characters go, not so much.
Okay, so it's very difficult, especially. It was said that the Dune book was unadaptable, that you could not really adapt that for a movie. And I thought that they did, as far as the adaptation did, extremely well, especially since the book was mostly in people's minds, characters' minds. But I think your objection is because of particular characters that do deviate, because there's a thematic change.
Mostly the handling of Jessica and the handling of Cheney. Cheney, the entire time, is a Doubting Thomas.
Right.
She's always, if anything, she plays a bit of an antagonist role.
Yeah.
In this, being the thing that gets in the way of Paul just going. This woman is getting in the way, and the director was trying to make them more central to the story, because in the original book they take a second stage to Paul,
right,
being the main character. Well, they took away from the main character in order to give it to these other minor characters, and in so doing, I think they weakened the main character quite a bit.
They did, but that was what I was going to ask. So what if you deviate from the book? Who cares? This is a story of its own, and you're going to take some. You have to take some creative license, because
you always have to take
Frank Herbert was really he did not write a whole lot of description in his stories as compared to somebody like J.R.R. Tolkien, who was heavier on the description. So there's not as much that you could.
And as far as the visuals go, which is what you're talking about,
right?
Those were fantastic.
Right. Yeah.
It's the parts that the original author did write detailed about.
Right.
The inner thoughts, the inner motive behind the characters. Those are the ones that were changed and were the most that stood out.
Yeah. So one big thing was different between this and the 1984 version and also the book was the time frame that this was done. When Paul hits the desert, he's trained by the Fremen. He's working with the Fremen. They start harassing and doing these guerrilla warfare attacks against the Harkonnens, and this happens over 2 or 3 years. His mother has had her baby. She's had Aaliyah. Aaliyah's a toddler, and he has actually had his own child, I believe, by Cheney. And there's a whole process that happens here, a long period of time. In the movie, boom, 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 it's within months. It has to be well within 9 months, because
the baby, Cheney's not born yet in the entire thing.
Aaliyah's not born yet. Yeah,
Aaliyah's not born yet.
So there was a difference in focus on Cheney and what her role was, definitely. And you might ask the question, why? And so there are some other things too here, and I'd just be real brief with this. there was a division with the Fremen on those who believed and those who did not. Those who believed the so-called prophets, I say so-called because they were just, again, propaganda, just made up, and those who didn't. And they said the people in the South, the Southerners were fundamentalists. They actually used the word fundamentalists, which I think was kind of crazy.
Yes, they used a lot of terms that weren't used in the book.
So this was picturing them as being sort of more fanatical, more people that were drawn. And in fact, his mother, Paul's mother, was talking to the baby, and she was going to start with the weakest first, the weakest Fremen, those who fear. She was going to use fear to make them believe, to follow her son. She's very manipulative in this one. This really comes out. Once she drinks that water of life, it's like, boom. And same with him, right?
Yeah, that's one of the issues with this that really weakens the main character is in the first, his father in the first one was so noble. So like, I care about the people. I'm going to go rescue the people. Oh, there's not a chance we'll survive. Ha, just watch me. Boom.
Right.
Go in to save people.
Right.
That's noble. And then you have manipulative, backstabbing main characters later.
Right.
It's
right.
like, no.
Well, both Lady Jessica and Paul Atreides.
Oh, and I would put Chani in that.
Chani wanted to keep him from being manipulative. She wanted
to keep him from doing the path. She was the one who was woke, who was aware of this religion just all being a lie.
And she was right.
All these stupid people who are following him.
She was right. In the end, she ends up being right about it, though, too, right?
Yeah, she ends up alone.
Well,
because she's the only one who's intelligent enough and woke enough to realize what's going on.
Okay, so here's the thing, too. This is, some people look at this and say, well, this is part 1, part 2. This is a sequel. No, it's not. It's just part two of one book. And then there's a follow-up book for this. There's 5.
Good luck on
5
that
sequels.
one.
It's Dune Messiah. They are talking about, it's already started. The script has already started been written last year. Yes. Already started been written last year. And it depends on, if it makes money, they'll produce it. I mean, bottom line.
Well, yeah,
right?
but I don't know how they're going to superglue this end here that they leave with that end.
That's why
the beginning. There's an issue.
No, that's why they did it. It was a cliffhanger to lead in, sort of like middle story, almost like when you have trilogy movies, you'll see this a lot. The middle one just kind of leaves it for the next to come through.
Well, yes, that is true. But what I'm saying is with Chani's position,
being a loner,
completely different.
Being a loner, okay.
Yeah, she's supposed to be with Paul. They're supposed to be having kids.
Yes.
For the next book in the series.
Well, maybe she's pregnant,
and she just ditches.
Maybe she's already pregnant.
Maybe. Well, yeah, I'll stay with you forever until.
That was a slam.
You do something I don't like, then I'm out.
Oh my gosh, Paul, dude, you do not tell your sweetheart, "I love you forever." Then turn around and say, "I'm going to take that girl right there."
What's bad about it? So Chani's from, a culture that it's
polygamous.
It's polygamous.
Yes,
that's standard.
Right.
In fact, the guys in the lead of the CHs had multiple wives. It was to be expected.
Right. Well, maybe she would be a little bit disappointed that Princess Irulan, because Paul's cementing his political authority here by saying, "I'm going to marry your daughter, Emperor. She's mine. All these houses are going to have to listen to me." That's basically how a lot of takeovers were done in the past, anyway. And he may never even sleep in the same house.
Well, that was clear in the book.
Right.
That it was a loveless marriage.
Right.
It was supposed to be a loveless marriage. Basically, you can sit there in your ivory tower, writing your books, writing your histories about everything that's going on. I will never share your bed. In fact, that becomes an issue in the later books.
But Chani may not know that. And number 2, in polygamous relationships, tribal or whatever, generally speaking, the first wife has preeminence. So she has authority over the other wives, and she's saying, "Whoa, dude, don't make Princess Irulan number 1. I'm number 1 over here." Now, I'm not saying that's not what's going through her mind.
That was not the statements in the movie at all. In fact,
I'm just trying to give her some room.
Just, I'm going to abandon this relationship. We're done.
Right.
And she just leaves.
Yeah, she seems more like a California girl than an actual Fremen.
She seems more like the actress who's playing her. than the actual character.
That is true.
That's
true.
on the screen.
And the other thing too with this is both her and Lady Jessica got a lot more screen time or a lot more attention than both the previous movie and the book. Not necessarily bad, but if you're doing it as a way to say, we want to show equal rights and stuff like this, everything around, that's not really what was happening in the book. I mean, tell the story the way you want to.
And if you're taking away from one character to give it to another, you're going to weaken the character you're taking it away from. And then at the end, it's kind of like, man, too bad the dad didn't live the whole time, because I could have been cheering for him. At least I liked him.
That's right.
I don't like the
He did come out on our poll. He did come out as the top character.
For good reason.
Yeah. Thematic review. Focusing on the big question presented in this movie, what is a Messiah in the Messianic archetype? So the word Messiah actually is a Greek, not Greek. It's a Hebrew word, Messiah, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It is to say that you're the anointed or the chosen one. So he was in Hebrew theology in the Old Testament. The Messiah was the one who was to free his people. He was the one to come back and reestablish David's kingdom forever. David was their top king. He had it all together before things started falling apart, civil war and everything like that. So they look back at David's kingdom and say, well, actually Solomon came after him, but still, it started going downhill after
right. So
him,
I think they were looking back with rosy glasses on that one.
Well, still, it was a golden age.
Had rebellions.
He did, but it was a golden age of Israel, and they're looking back on that. And there are a lot of messianic prophecies were about that, and not just the kingdom of Israel being reestablished, but in a larger. Actually, it was for a much larger, deeper scope. It wasn't just reestablishing that kingdom, but reestablishing a relationship with God in a way that puts us back in not a garden experience like the Garden of Eden, but a post-garden experience, because we were innocent there. We're not innocent now. We're redeemed, restored, and glorified. And that is part of this. So this whole thing of the Messiah was to go beyond just, hey, we're going to have this utopia here. It was more also a relationship with God. That is where that word comes from. And so it's been borrowed through years, and it's become a borrowed term for a trope used in writing fiction. And with that is the Messiah figure is this person who is foretold of all this kind of stuff, this leader that is coming. It's usually a messianic leader. And it doesn't necessarily need to be foretold, but we're following him. And you could almost say that there are other leaders in history, not so good ones, that have been followed like that too. You got Genghis Khan. He had this huge following. You got charismatic following behind, of course, Hitler, and then other figures throughout history. Muhammad would be another one there, although you would not necessarily say he's messianic. He does kind of fit that archetype with it there.
At least in the eyes of his followers, yes.
So in that way, you can have a godless Messiah figure without religion. But this was put forward as being a religious thing, but it's a godless religion. Yeah, the Fremen do have a god. Boulle was supposed to be the Zen Sunni god, but they really don't talk about it much other than Shai-Hulud, which is the worm, right?
And they use a lot of, definitely in this part 2, they use a lot of Muslim terminology as far as like the prophet or the jinn or those sort of concepts they borrowed in order to adapt this concept into this world. But again, that would be rejected by all Muslims.
So I would say that this is not really a religious figure in terms of they really did not have theistic religion. So you cannot, I don't believe you can compare this to Christianity at all to say that, oh, he was a Christ-like figure. Not at all. He was not the picture of Jesus that's in the New Testament at all. So then the question comes up, is religion dangerous? And this is one of the themes that Frank Herbert had in his books, that religion, especially messianic religions, were dangerous in that they would drive people to a mindless fervor to follow a particular individual. And I would say that we have had others that other philosophies that have caused more death throughout history than religion in general. So theistic religions versus non-theistic philosophies, which has caused more harm and warfare. Frank Herbert is basically saying religion is used by politics. It is nothing more than a tool of politics. It's a very dangerous tool, and a lot of people generally get killed by this. So I'm going to put that up as a question, and I'm going to then answer that with this graphic. Out of 1,763 wars surveyed over 10,000 years, religiously motivated or affiliated wars in total comprise 7% of fatalities. And so I'm going to leave this up here just for a moment, just to kind of review this, to say, hey, this is against what common sense or common knowledge would say at the time, to say that you got a lot more religion creates wars. And I would say out of those wars, then would be another question. How many of them were spawned by which religion? That would be another one to look at too.
I just point out that specifically Islam is a larger percentage than all non-Islamic religious wars.
Yes.
Just pointing out a little number there.
Now, not to say that there weren't wars that were fought by Christians among Christians, or that there were other atrocities committed by Christians that should not have been committed. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying an overall look throughout history. When you look at history in general, religion in general is not the main cause of wars. Most of it has to do with money and territory. Territorial expansion, or philosophies like communism. Hey, thank you very much. 200 million dead. There you go. There's an atheistic philosophy that didn't work out too well, and I hope we don't try it again too seriously in this century. Last century was bad enough. So that about wraps it up for our review. Well, I'm going to be at a conference next week, and I believe you will be too, correct?
Yep.
And that conference is going to be the Florida Apologetic Con. And we may not be able to do Tuesday and Thursday live streams. I don't know. I'm not sure how this is going to work. These are some of the event speakers that are going to be there. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to try as much as I can to be able to do maybe a quick broadcast or live stream from down there, maybe do a couple. I'm very excited about it. It's going to be an interesting event. We're going to have a chance to meet a lot of great people. So if you happen to go down there for that event, I hope to see you there. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day.